All right, folks, we are in the home stretch here, and I'm excited to be able to have a conversation with TJ Harris, who is the director of luxury brands at Citizen Watch America. And we're going to have a conversation to talk about how collecting communities are shaping the watch industry and how brands think about their customers. My name is Jason Gong. I'm the founder of Complecto, which is a community and a platform focused on elevating underrepresented voices in the watch industry. I'd love to introduce you, TJ. Please tell us more about yourself.
Thank you for having me here with you, Jason. My name is TJ Harris. I'm the Director of Brand Communications at Citizen Watch America for Bulova, Accutron, Alpina, and Frederic Constant.
My apologies for butchering your title. I totally messed that up. I hope no one at Citizen Watch America sends me an angry email. Let's start with like how you ended up here. TJ, tell us about your journey into the watch industry, because you're relatively new, right, to the industry?
Yes. So I've been in the industry for a little over a year now at this position. I started last January with Citizen Watch America, and just really realized that I liked watches a lot more than I might have even known. That I was one of you. Yeah. And it's been an incredible journey, and just navigating, working at such an amazing organization like CWA, but also working on a brand with so much heritage and history like Bulova and Accutron, and finding out new things about other brands like Alpina and Frederic Constant each and every day that I'm working there.
Yeah. Now, these are all brands with very rich, robust histories. And I'm curious to better understand how you all think about watch communities, right? And maybe we'll take a step back when we talk about watch communities, collecting communities, and we can define those a bit, right? I think most folks, when they probably think about a collecting community, Red Bar is probably the first name that comes to mind, right? They're like the OG group, right? Really blazed the trail for a lot of collecting communities that followed. And we've seen an evolution of collecting communities as well, right? Obviously, we've got Complecto. We've got other communities like Watch Femme, like CP Time, communities that are really focused on being super intentional about engaging underrepresented voices and communities in this space. How are you all thinking about communities and the way that you partner and engage with them as you think about your brand strategy and how you tell your story?
So on the Bulova and Accutron side, it's been quite interesting because I fell into a lot of relationships with watch communities that were already present. Your Red Bars, and there's a lot of Bulova and Accutron collectors that the brand had engaged with and almost consulted the community with some of our legacy series pieces, and also our heritage pieces. And on the Bulova side, they're very much in touch with the Bulova collectors that have online communities, and which piece should we do next in our archive series. So that's something that I think was really neat. But myself, when I started learning about watch communities like Complecto and Red Bar, that was new to me. So really finding their place and understanding them. Me being new to the industry, what I really was able to, the way I looked at it was, although you guys are a community, I looked at you guys as almost the industry as well. I thought that your voice was so important, and being able to understand what you're looking for, what made you guys, what moved the needle for the communities was so important, that I found ways to then yell your messaging and what I was taking in from you back in the office. Yeah. And I found that to be really...
It's interesting because you're the first person I've spoken to within the industry that has shared that perspective, where they said, well, actually, we think the community is the industry, right? Talk more about that. How would you unpack that?
Yeah, I think a big part of that is, like, as I'm saying, I think I understand the importance of your community's voices, not just Complecto, but the other communities, and really seeing that the people that are attending your events, the people that are active and passionate about watchmaking, they really are the ones that are the tastemakers, and that really, and as you know, was mentioned in the conversation you were having before, you guys are the heartbeat of the industry, and you're really the ones that are that sentiment is trickling down, and it's important to take that feedback and really and use that to be able to in our messaging as our brand communications, really use that in our messaging and making sure that that's really that you guys are represented in different ways throughout the company.
Yeah. As someone who's been collecting watches for a really long time, I remember when the idea of having your own kind of club watch was a very novel thing, right? It was something so cool, super exclusive. And I think right over the last 7 to 10 years, we've seen this emergence of club edition watches, right? Where brands are actively collaborating with different collecting community groups at varying levels of scale, right? How do you think, or what do you think the opportunity is, for Citizen Watch America, the brands that you're representing and that you're helping to build? When you think about collecting communities, how do you think about the folks that you might want to partner with, right? And the ways in which you can collaborate with them. Maybe it's a collaborative watch, but maybe there are some other ways, right? What does that look like?
It's interesting because I think that collaborations really have to have a level of authenticity, and I think that's one of the most important things for any type of collaboration. I know it reminds me of back when I was introduced to you by one of my coworkers who spoke very highly about the group you were starting in the beginning. And I remember the first time we got on a Teams or Zoom meeting, and I was like, "Oh, I want to do a collaboration. Like maybe we'll have an event." And you really slowed me down.
Well, you wanted to do a fantasy football draft.
It was a hot idea.
He said, "Let's host a fantasy football draft for your community." I was like,
and then you really stopped me and you said, "Hold on a second. Let me tell you about the community and what I'm building." And I really had to take a step back, and it really challenged me to really evaluate how I wanted to approach partnering with a group like yourself and what you're building in a very authentic way, rather than not saying that I wanted to do something inauthentic, but it really pushed me to say I'm better than that, and I think we found meaningful ways to collaborate, and it's been an incredible journey, and I think that our authenticity of the collaborations has allowed you to elevate your brand's messaging while also sharing some of the stories that we have on the Bulova, Accutron, Frederic Constant, and Alpina sides.
Yeah. When you think about watch collecting communities, what are the qualities, right, that are really important to you when you think about the communities that you want to partner with and things like an alignment of values, right?
Yeah, I think the alignment of values is always really important. I think that's what really drew me to working with Complecto. A lot, like I said, a lot of the communities that we do partner with right now already we fell into, but then there are when we're speaking inclusion and the different voices of those that might not be as represented throughout the industry. I think that's really important especially with the brands that I represent and the product lines that I represent. With so many different product lines and so many different types of watches, that there are products for different people to feel connected to, and I think that's really important to make sure that the groups that we are partnering with have a mission of some sort that's meaningful.
Now, when you think about the Citizen Watch America portfolio of brands, y'all sell a lot of watches, right? And when I think historically people think about watch clubs, watch collecting communities, they tend to be probably perceived as something that's fairly niche, right? Folks that are watch geeks, super passionate, super enthusiastic, want to go to the meetups and have all those geeky conversations, right, about movements and case diameters and lug widths. But for a brand at the level of scale that many of the CWA brands are at, right? A lot of those folks might not be or probably not a part of watch communities or clubs. So how do you all kind of think through and maybe balance, right? How much insight you draw, how much collaboration you draw from relatively niche watch communities versus what's probably the majority of the folks who you're serving that might not be at events like this or in rooms like these?
Well, I think someone like me, I get sent back to my area of the office from product development, I get told to go back to where I'm supposed to be, and in a funny way. But I think that the voice that the communities have, when you're properly engaging with communities like this, it does trickle down to different places in the organization, even as with the product line as wide and distribution as wide as something like somewhere like CWA. So it is quite interesting that it is fascinating when I'm able to take some of those things and find different ways to make sure that they're being implemented or find different ways to make sure the voice is represented on the other side of the watches.
I wanted to also talk a little bit about partnerships that transcend necessarily watch communities, but Bulova, for example. Bulova has some really interesting partnerships. You've been working with the Latin Grammys, for example, for a long time, right? You've got a really awesome collaboration with Mark Anthony. You've done work with Nile Rodgers. You've got a partnership with the Apollo Theater. You've been making investments in the community and at the community level for a while. Would love to understand a little bit more about how those choices are made and kind of why you all said, these are the individuals that we want to partner with. These are communities that we really want to support, elevate, and invest in.
Kind of how I mentioned before, the authenticity of a partnership, that goes through with all of those relationships. I know you mentioned Mark Anthony. That's something where he was a fan of the product and really, he's been in the office, he's worked with the design and really put his hand all over the collaboration. The Apollo Theater, that's something that almost just made sense with Bulova being a New York brand for nearly 150 years, coming up on 150 years, to have such partnerships with music, being the Latin Grammys, Mark Anthony, and it just made a lot of sense to really support something that's right in our backyard, and that's a partnership that obviously the Apollo is actually known worldwide, and a lot of people are really excited about that partnership as well. Those partnerships, they're rooted in something, and then we find ways to make them as grand as possible, and that's really been exciting. And again, with such a wide array of product lines, they all have a special place, and they're always rooted in something unique.
Yeah, and these are individuals, partnerships, institutions that are rooted in the community, right? Very much so, and communities that are largely comprised of the kind of folks that historically maybe have not participated in the watch hobby, right? As visibly as we often see at industry events, at representation in marketing strategies and plans, right? Folks maybe in different types of roles, and we know that you have some folks within the CWA family as well. But from a representation standpoint, I mean, these are the types of partnerships that we don't see a lot of other brands doing.
Yeah, I think that's also what's very unique about Complecto is, when you say inclusion, that's another thing that I thought was very, very unique about the group. Inclusion on meeting people wherever they are in their watch collecting journey. A lot of these people might not consider themselves watch collectors, but they might be considered that under your standards, and to have a lot of these different communities, whether it's someone in the Latin Grammys or someone interested in the Latin Grammys or someone interested in any of the watches under the CWA umbrella, it was refreshing to see a community like you building that is, I don't want to say willing to, but that is meeting people right there in that journey and not intimidating them or making them feel insecure in that sense, so that they can grow into this space. So that is something that someone new to the industry that I really appreciated and think there's a lot of value in.
So as someone who is new to the industry, bringing a fresh perspective, a different point of view and an approach to the job, and through some of the partnerships that have already been established and some of the new partnerships, right, that you're developing, specifically through the lens of inclusion, right? How do you think that approach, that idea, that concept will inform how watch brands and the industry more broadly approaches everything that they do, whether it is how they design and build their watches to how they market and communicate them out to customers? How do you see this, the messaging around inclusion, evolving and impacting the industry moving forward?
I think you'll start to see brands really not marketing or trying to include different groups and singling them out while including them, which is kind of ironic because then it's kind of putting them in a box in that sense. But really creating product and marketing to the community as a whole, and including these communities and that are there as part of their overall product line, their marketing efforts, and I think you'll start seeing that really weave into the messaging and it evolving into more than just boxing them into a specific category.
Yeah. Just from my own observations as a collector, but also with the work that we're doing through Complecto, I've noticed over the last couple of years we're starting to see more representation in marketing, right, and advertising, and I think that's a great place to start. And I also am starting to see the conversation around inclusion and diversity and watch communities, right, as a vessel through which brands in the industry can connect with different demographics, right, of customers and potential customers. I see folks starting to pay a lot more attention to that.
Yeah, it is a fine line to almost do it too intentionally, and you lose a level of authenticity. So I think when you're true and genuine with the inclusion, it almost comes naturally, and I think that's what you'll start to see. You start to see that messaging weaved in. You start to see the inclusion in the product offering. You start to see the inclusion in the overall marketing plans, and that turns into a little bit more of a genuine level of inclusion.
How does a watch brand achieve a genuine level of inclusion? What does that look like from your perspective, right? Because it is a fine line, right, between being really authentic and genuine in your approach versus something that could be construed as pandering, right? How does a brand straddle that line and try to get it right?
I mean, I think that's always tricky. I mean, not to say that I do everything right, but I think the way that I've worked in partnering with your organization has been, I think, something unique. You know, the way that I'm able to bounce ideas off of you, have discussions, find out what is going to help your messaging and what's going to help your mission, rather than approaching you with what I think would be the best thing for your group or for the best thing, you know, and kind of nip that in the bud right from our first conversation about, you know, a flag football event, but really finding those type of ways and really thinking from the perspective of your group and thinking from the perspective of how to do something a little bit outside of the box, not just throw a party, not just throw an event. I know we had during the holiday season we had an event at the office with Complecto, and our going back and forth, we were able to decide how to really have an event. And I know one of the things, I was kind of in a place where I don't want to bore your group with teaching them, trying to sell them too much. And one of the things that you said was, well, no, I want to make sure there's an educational component to this, and I want to make sure there's this. So really having that discussion, compromising and finding the right way to do things benefited us, because I thought that the event that we had was a great event, and I think a lot of people had a really good time, and left with a better knowledge and understanding of the brands that are under the CWA umbrella.
Yeah. And there was a lot of storytelling that all of the brands under the umbrella were able to achieve that night during our event. And I think a point that you made that really has stuck out for me as I've been navigating this journey with Complecto and engaging brands in this conversation is I think the brands that we've been able to have the most success with are the brands that have asked a lot of questions, right? The brands that have listened more than they have spoken, right? And brands that have really been earnest in their effort to try to understand and say, we don't know what we don't know, right? Help us understand what matters, to your community, what folks value, what they care about, and take an approach that aligns with as many of those things as we can. I think also what I've learned, and I'm still learning, is that the community they're pretty understanding. They'll give brands grace, right? Like, they don't expect a brand to get it right all the time. But if you can be earnest and sincere in your approach, right, folks will be able to recognize that authenticity, right, and say, you know what, we know where they're trying to go, and we're willing to work with you to help you get there, right?
Right. And also that level of transparency. I know you and I have conversations, and I will point out things that I have a interest in. I think that stories that I want to communicate, and just bouncing ideas off and saying that, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. How do you think is the best way to do that? And really being able to use a group like Complecto to find those conduits to convey that communication has been really beneficial. So I think that level of transparency has really helped us in really meeting you where your members are, but also finding a way for us to find a place to meet as collaborative partners.
100%. I want to just do a quick check-in with the audience and see if there's anyone that has a question for TJ, for myself, anything that you'd like us to unpack. Happy to open the floor up for anyone that's curious.
And so my question is like this. Okay. Close to your mouth. It doesn't bite. My question. So, when it comes to a fairly expensive hobby of watches, I'm into watches, and I came from an extremely poor family, and they were not into watches. And so, for a number of historical reasons, there are different communities in this country that don't have the same economic resources. And so, I'm talking. So, that's my question. Like, that's a reality. Yep. And mind you, I'm into watches. I'm here. So, I hope this isn't a challenge, but it seems for the watch community a huge challenge.
So I think the point you make around the socioeconomic component in folks of different means, right, that obviously will impact, their participation in the hobby on a number of levels. And I think that's a really important point. I think with Complecto, that's been top of mind for me, because as a collector who's been in the mix for a long time, and being in New York City and living in the Bay Area for a period of time, you can get a bit of a distorted view, right, of what watch collecting is. But the reality is most folks are not walking around with FP Journe on their wrist, right? And so I think what it really comes down to when we think about inclusion is, and this was a driving force behind my desire to start Complecto, was to create a space where truly anyone could show up with any watch on their wrist or no watch at all, right? And just be able to share the passion and the enthusiasm around the hobby and the craft without judgment, without pretense. And I'll tell you, it has been one of the most incredible experiences to see. If you ever come to a Complecto event, and I hope that we're able to do more of them in San Francisco, you'll find folks in our community that are wearing Seiko 5s, that are wearing Casio calculator watches, and they're wearing application pieces from Patek, right? And everything in between. And they are just as excited to hear about your first watch that you brought to the meetup that you got as an 8-year-old as they are to share, their super high-end, super complicated, timepiece. And so that is something that I have found we've been able to achieve through being really values-driven and wearing that on our sleeve. And I think that's enabled us to build a community of folks who've opted in, right? To say, you know what, we care more about the quality of the people than the price and provenance of the watch on your wrist. And that's given us an opportunity to really build a culture where that shared passion is paramount, and people first, watches second.
And just to add to that, I think what you've done with building Complecto is opened up a lot of people to educating themselves, feeling more confident, having less insecurities about only having expensive or certain name brand watches, and allow people to educate themselves and learn more and find value in things that make them happy and make them happy rather than pleasing other people. And that I think is great as well, because there's a watch is such a personal purchase, and you find so many people buying watches to impress other people, and that level of education and empowerment to the members to be able to do that, I think is wonderful. I mean, I think under the CWA umbrella, we have so many wonderful timepieces, so many wonderful stories and heritage, and so many people have come up to the booth and telling us about their grandfather's Accutron or their father's Bulova, and those stories should be proud of those stories. So a group like Complecto just allows people has I've seen empowering people to really feel comfortable wherever they are, whatever they have a sentimental value about, or just an emotional value connection to really feel like they can be proud of that.
Thanks so much for sharing this stuff with us. I'm wondering if you could speak about how the conversations you've had around inclusion and accessing different communities have fed back into the design, engineering, and planning of future products. If you're maybe trying to turn the ship of what you're doing to open up the actual product to more people.
Interesting. You want to take a stab at that one?
Opening up the product to more people. Yeah, sure. There. As far as, I'm sorry.
So just so I can restate, you were asking about how this focus on inclusion and diversity, how that might be showing up in the process in terms of how products are designed, right? And future product planning.
Yeah, so I know Jason and I have been discussing working on some more projects in the future. When it comes to products, there is a very involved design and development process, but really, I think at CWA there are a lot of decisions that are made as far as product design that a lot of communities are represented, even when we're not as explicitly marketing to them. A lot of things are made, but I really. Those decisions that are made and really communicating them in the right way and is something that I think more people should know about. The decisions around some of these design cues and things and the factors that go into them are, I know that they exist, but just finding different ways to communicate that. I mean, there are obvious ones like the Apollo watch, for instance. It has this representation of the red and the sign of Apollo and things like that. But there are more organic, there are more ingrained design cues and things that are put into the products as well.
I'm going to answer your question a little bit differently because I don't work at a brand and I'm new to the industry and I don't have a ton of insight into the specifics when it comes to product design, planning, and all of that. But what I will share is that for Complecto, what I have is an aspiration, right, and a vision that I don't speak about quite as often. But I think to the point that you made, the question that you're asking, right, is my dream is to be able to inform those processes by helping brands to recognize the value of diversity and inclusion when they think about the way that they're building their company, right? The individuals that they're hiring, how they're training and developing people, right? We need to make sure that the people that are sitting in the rooms when decisions get made are reflective of the communities that these brands want to sell to, that they want to reach, that they want to engage. So that needs to extend to the watchmakers. It needs to extend to product managers, to designers, to marketing professionals. That, in my mind, is how you get to a place where inclusion and diversity is holistically integrated right into every facet of how a product is built, marketed, and ultimately sold. Now that's a broad aspiration, but that's me swinging for the fences with Complecto, Well, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to chat with us. TJ, thank you so much for making the time to sit with me and have this conversation and just sharing a little more insight with folks about what we get excited about when it comes to communities and the different ways that we're thinking about partnership. Thank you, man.
No, I appreciate you having me, and thank you to the Complecto group and Nelly. I didn't get my fireplace, but you promised a fireplace. And thanks for having me. It's been a great show, and I hope everybody is enjoying the show as well.
Absolutely. And if you haven't gotten a drink ticket, please grab one from one of the Complecto team members. And a huge shout out to the Windup team. Thank you all for the opportunity. How do you find us? Great question. You can find us on Instagram at Complecto_. You can also scan the QR code on our poster or on any Complecto team member's phone to learn more about who we are, where we're popping up, different events that we're going to be hosting and curating, and all the content and media that we've got coming down the pipeline. All right? And I'm happy to chat with anybody, so feel free to run up on me. Thank y'all.